invite Sister Kochurani. Dr. Kochurani Abraham is a feminist theologian, is a researcher, is a writer and trainer on issues related to gender, sexuality, spirituality, and ecological concerns. She is a former coordinator of Ecclesia in Asia. She is at the moment the Vice President of the Indian Theological Association and the interim convener of the Indian Christian Women's Movement. Most important, Kochurani has been a lifelong seeker, willing to take risks, willing to shape new paradigms in consecrated life itself. And I think it is this particular aspect of Kochurani being a seeker of new ways of living our consecrated life that makes her intervention particularly important for us. She will speak to us today on the challenges and opportunities that climate change offers us religious brothers. This is a theme that has very importantly come up in our general chapters in the last few years. And I think this is a theme that is extremely important for us in our mission. Kochurani, please.
Thank you, Brother Varghese, for this kind introduction and for the invite. I feel honored to be with you all in these deliberations as you seek to understand what it means to be prophets and proclaimers of good news in a post-pandemic world. This initiative on the part of the Gabriel Secretariat for Justice and Peace is commendable. It shows that you are seriously considering the challenges and opportunities before you as religious brothers. I'm happy to be part of this search as you look for ways to respond effectively to these challenges and opportunities. As Brother mentioned, I am asked to speak on climate change and ecological concerns. In this short presentation, I'm not going to give you the details of the facts and figures about climate change. We shall first take a brief look at the undercurrents of this issue that will signal to the challenges and opportunities underlying the logical question. And then you can see how you would like to respond as individuals and as an institute that has a global presence. We are reaching the tail end of the year 2020. This year has been apparently seen as a perfect year to look at the earth, which is in the thick of the raging wildfires, record-setting storms, the fast melting glaciers, rising sea levels, and all these amidst the pandemic continuing its unbridled dance of death and destruction of health and economy across the globe. Scientists analyzing these trends observe that the different systems on Earth are tied together in an intricate pattern, and they raise the question, what happens when you pull on one thread? How does it affect something else? I think this is a very important question that you should keep in mind when you look for responses. What happens when you pull on one thread? How does it affect something else? The links between climate change and the coronavirus has been highlighted by many observers and experts in this field. COVID-19 emergency has acutely overshadowed public reckoning with the climate crisis, and its reverberations will continue long after the first declining wave of infections. Further, it is noted that land use change and deforestation are primary global drivers of biodiversity destruction. They heighten the risk of further pandemics by bringing humans into contact with new threats such as the coronavirus. Every species lost is an irreversible event that decreases the resilience of natural and human systems on a permanent basis. All these observations make us deeply conscious of the intrinsic connectedness between human life and all other forms of life on this universe, which can serve to sustain life or destroy it. Whether the coronavirus COVID-19 emerged from Wuhan's open-air wet markets or some other source, what is evident is that it has deepened the vulnerability of the already fragile planet. It is acknowledged why viruses spill over when human environmental balance gets tilted. According to the latest report by the UN's World Meteorological Organization, the last 5 years have been the hottest on record, pushing global temperatures 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Among a cascade of alarming findings, the WMO points to sea level rise that continues to accelerate and now averages 4.8 millimeters a year, a trend that threatens to submerge vast stretches of coastal areas late in the century. And it is observed that even as the pandemic could lead to a temporary dip in global greenhouse gas emissions, this must not distract from the urgent need for rapid fundamental changes in infrastructure, energy, land use, and industrial systems to set us on a path to net zero emissions globally, latest by 2050. Confronted by the threats posed by the climate crisis, many governments around the world have already begun declaring a state of climate emergency. Climate emergency has been defined as a situation in which urgent action is required to reduce or halt climate change and avoid potentially irreversible environmental damage resulting from it. The UN chief Antonio Guterres terms climate emergency as the central question facing the world, and it is termed as the final call to save the world from a climate catastrophe. Against this backdrop, I think we need to ask some fundamental questions. What is happening to this world today? What is happening to us as humans? Why have we reached a stage of climate emergency? Why are we heading for a climate catastrophe? To these questions, on the one hand, we can find easy answers from scientific records on the greenhouse gas emissions that have heated our planet and similar answers. But these answers would leave us unaffected. If you and I, who are non-experts in these matters, have to respond to this challenge, I think we need to be informed, but mere information will not move us. We need to go beyond mere numbers and rational conclusions to feel the pain of the earth. And that can happen only if we are awakened to a sense of being interconnected and interdependent to all forms of life on this planet. We will know the pain of the earth and its creatures then, in our guts and in our spirit. To my reading, the climate change crisis and the consequent ecological disasters are like symptoms of an autoimmune disease afflicting the body of the earth. Why do I call it autoimmune disease? Though there are different reasons why autoimmune diseases are triggered in the human body, prolonged stress and strain is certainly a reason why the immune system that is meant to protect the body caves in, leading to such disease. I can say this with conviction because I have known this in my own body on getting rheumatoid after going through considerable stress and strain at a certain phase in my life. I think we can say that similar to what happens to the human body over a shorter spell of time could happen also to the body of the earth over a longer period of excessive stress and strain. Climate change could be taken as a symptom of such an autoimmune disease afflicting the earth. And if you do not take adequate care of the earth, the ecosystem could collapse on reaching a point of no return. I think this is the ecological concern that we need to wake up to. Yesterday, we looked at the issue of gender-based discrimination, and I think in addressing ecological concerns, we cannot bypass the gender question. Most of you here are men, and you may wonder, what does climate change to do with gender? Feminist environmental thought since the 1970s throws light on this. When French writer Francois Dumont coined the term ecological feminism in 1974, it served to bring to surface the deeper entanglements of gender and ecology. Ecofeminism explores the connections between the unjustified dominations of women and nature, critiques male-biased Western canonical philosophical views, which include assumptions, concepts, claims, distinctions, positions, and theories about women and nature, and calls for alternative solutions to such male-biased views. To illustrate this, I will take a linguistic example, since language is a powerful medium that reinforces gendered connections between woman and the earth. In my own mother tongue, Malayalam, I have heard from childhood the phrase, Pennayal Bhumiyolam Shemikanam, often repeated. This means to say, a woman must be patient like the earth. And patience here is prescribed as an antidote in the face of suffering. Ecofeminism brings out the intricate connections between the violence of unjust, non-sustainable economic systems that afflict the earth and the growing frequency and brutality of violence against women, which has led to immense suffering. Ecofeminism shows how the structures of traditional patriarchy merge with structures of capitalist patriarchy to intensify violence against women and the earth. Linked histories of capitalism and colonialism bring out the global subjugation of women and nature, and so ecofeminists argue that no solution to ecological crisis will be realized within a society whose fundamental model of relationships continue to be one of domination. On the structures of domination, ecofeminist discussions make important critical observations about the Western philosophical tradition. In the dualistic positioning of male versus female and culture versus nature, it is noted that men have appropriated all that is associated with culture in terms of knowledge production, constructions of ideologies and belief systems, the creation of language, and particularly in defining what religion is all about, religion being one of the most powerful vehicles of culture. In the bargain, women have been identified with nature, the earth, all the more for the essentialized association of women with body and reproduction. While culture dominated by men was meant to be active and dynamic, rational and productive, female bodies and the earth were expected to remain passive and receptive, vulnerable to the exploitation by pleasure-seeking and profit-oriented masters of culture. Even as nature was clothed in cultural assumptions, idealized and romanticized Mother Bountiful, Mother Nature, endless source of nourishment and the like, nature was also considered irrational, chaotic, and mindless. It was claimed that vast tracts of wilderness was to be tamed or domesticated. The resources needed to be plundered and exploited for human enjoyment. Ecofeminists also argue that 17th century science could be implicated in the ecological crisis, the domination of nature and the devaluation of women in the production of scientific knowledge. Ecofeminists trace the historical roots of gendering of the earth to the heroes of English Renaissance like Francis Bacon and William Harvey, who deployed sexual imagery and sexual politics to structure empirical method as power over nature. Nature for Francis Bacon and everyone else in the Renaissance and scientific revolution was female. Bacon advocated extracting nature's secrets from her bosom through science and technology. Feeding the Industrial Revolution were representations that likened nature as a woman waiting to be raped. The use of such vicious and violent imagery is reflected in the growth of mining industry in this phase. It was argued that women, just as a woman's womb symbolically yielded to forceps in taking the baby out, so secrets harbored in nature's womb could be wrested from her grasp through technology for use in the improvement of the human condition. The subjugation of nature as female was thus integral to the scientific method. One of Bacon's earliest, though posthumously published works, The Masculine Birth of Time, which was written between 1602 and 03, is subtitled The Great Instauration of the Dominion of Man over the Universe. For many ecofeminists, his words take a chilling significance as he wrote this at a time of the great European witch hunt, when many defenseless women were being tortured on a huge scale in order to extract the truth behind the powers that they exercised. Western philosophical tradition had taken reason as the quality that makes human superior to non-human animals and nature. And it was assumed that there was an ontological divide between humans and other forms of life. This is being seriously questioned today. So also the hierarchical thinking that positions some humans as superior to others in the name of race, class, caste, ethnicity, or gender difference. Ecofeminists argue that an ecological revolution would entail new relationships between women and men, among humans, and between humans and nature. In this context, we need to problematize the naming of the current geological age as the Anthropocene epoch. The term Anthropocene has been assigned to the present era in view of the fact that human activity has become the dominant influence on climate and the environment. Feminist theorists have contested this, taking into consideration the increasingly unequal effects of climate change and the political and ethical responsibilities posed by it. They ask, how can an epoch be named after a species that is not equally responsible for its conditions throughout history? The difficulty to think of a universal, indigenous and non-industrial, non-Western cultures while contributing to climate change are at the highest risk of violence from the effects of projects that continue to aggravate environmental degradation, as well as the increasingly violent social relations that accompany these projects. This issue is also raised not from the marginalized humans, but also from the perspective of the LGBTQI groups. And so the overwhelming singular question that feminism cannot stop asking is, whose Anthropocene? What I propose is a theology and spirituality of interbeing if we are committed to healing ourselves and healing the planet. Today, feminist seekers committed to spirituality and justice are unpacking the concept we inter are. It points to our existence as mutually constituted beings with the rest of creation. We become who we are in mutuality, in the give and take with other forms of life in this universe. Laudato Si alludes to this in speaking of our interconnectedness and interrelatedness with the rest of creation. Growing into the awareness of we inter are opens us to creation, which is non-hierarchical, poly-existence. Here there is no place for binaries, particularly the binary of the secular versus the sacred, man versus woman, human versus nature. Growing into the consciousness of our existence as interbeings, there is no other in the hierarchical sense who could be exploited to satisfy one's greed. We do not stand superior to another, but learn the art of respecting who or what is different. As interbeings, the pain of one affects the other, and there is space for mutual love and care. Defending the rights of the most vulnerable, less privileged, and marginalized makes sense in this identity construction of we inter are. This spiritual awakening is also at the core of the Christian economy of salvation. That is why Jesus could codify the law and the prophets into one single commandment of love. And in all simplicity, he could take the bread and break it, saying, "This is my body broken for you." Something that is celebrated as cosmic Eucharist every day. What are the implications of becoming we inter are? Laudato Si reminds us of the urgency of caring for our common home. Caring has been conventionally gendered as women's task, as girls and women have been socialized to be expert caregivers in the family and in the church. Women have been assigned the title of co-workers for their roles as caregivers. Now the question which I would like to pose to you, particularly the men in this webinar, can we all be homemakers and caregivers? Moving beyond the gendered prescriptions of caregiving, care has to inform every aspect of public life, be it in the sphere of politics, economy, religion, and the like, so that decisions affecting the life of humans and the earth are taken carefully, causing no harm to anyone or anything. And we know that if development has to be sustainable and inclusive, there is no shortcut than to practice care economy. So, dear brothers and sisters, I am very convinced that healing the earth becomes possible not merely by cutting down greenhouse gas emissions. We need this spiritual revolution where we touch the Spirit of God, renewing the face of the earth. Through pluriform manifestations of life, through people of goodwill who take a stand for justice, peace, and integrity of creation, through people who become interbeing. And if we are convinced of this conviction will flow out of us in all our relationships and commitments, our apostolates, our engagements, in education of children and our work with youth. This is where you brothers, tomorrow when you look at your responses, you have to pay attention to what is your conviction about your at-homeness on this earth, and how do you transmit this to your students, particularly in the field of education. Because today, the United Nations has been very strongly promoting the agency of children. And I think the children are very, they are open to understand the wisdom of the interbeingness of the universe, as they are not conditioned to be hierarchical and dualistic in mindset as we adults are. So we can do a lot of work tapping this original beauty and innocence of children and youth. To conclude, these are the challenges and opportunities before you and me as we live in these chaotic times of climate emergency. Perhaps you need to ask in your own spaces how you are challenged as a faith community of brothers of Saint Gabriel, and what are the opportunities you perceive. What is the unique perspective you can bring as a global force of brothers committed to justice, peace, and integrity of creation? How would you respond to the call of the Spirit to become interbeings with the rest of creation? Climate emergency is surely saying aloud that the old systems and patterns of thought cannot sustain life anymore. So the question is, can we become the raw material for the new to emerge? In our response is our future and the future of this planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kochurani, for that very erudite and very insightful intervention. I think this has been great. Your expertise in climate issues and your expertise in feminism and feminist theology, you were able to so beautifully integrate. And I think it is important that theology and spirituality that you came up with, a theology and spirituality of interbeing, as that is sustainable, that can make life possible on this earth. I think that's a very important insight as brothers who are called to be brothers by our vocation, our very identity. Thank you, Kochurani.